Hey guys, it is Hart breaking down the 7-game NBA slate here on DraftKings, talking through some of my favorite early look core plays as well as a potential lineup build, looking to continue the success from last night into tonight. So make sure to hit that like button. I'll see you guys in the breakdown. Finally, guys, last night I almost ran neutral. I still didn't run neutral, still kind of ran bad, but I finally ran almost neutral, and I had a nice 5x night. Obviously nothing crazy. It could have been crazy. We'll get into that in a second, but yeah. Was able to cash the lineup with Davian, who's absolute horrific there. I did mention it in my free Patreon write-up. He's been bad, but we should hopefully expect 15. He didn't even get 5. Like, he barely got 5. That dude is terrible. But cashed the smaller one there in a single entry, and then in the bigger 15K to first, I got 316th place, 301.5 in terms of just fantasy scores. You can see Dame went for 42, Branham 35, 31 for Kevin Huerter, Hunter 39. Bamba 24, LaMelo 55, Neesmith 34, and Pascal 39. So, of course, I mentioned this in my breakdown yesterday. I knew the one time I played Dame, he will go for a floor game. Of course he did. That was super frustrating because that could have really helped me out in terms of, potentially getting first place. Like, first place was only 338. I'm at 301. I think I easily could have got at least 10 more points to Dame, 10 more from Siakam there in the best spot on the board. At least 10 more from Mo Bamba, who lost pretty much the whole second half in terms of minutes because he wanted to fight Austin Rivers. Like, what? But yeah, it could have been a huge night. It was a solid night. Still didn't run the best. As you can see, Dame had a floor game. Branham, I talked about him in my Patreon lineup, how he's one of my early look core building blocks. Same thing with Huerter. Huerter was a little disappointing. Just really couldn't score too much there. Hunter was fantastic for me. Mo Bamba was super frustrating. He was super low owned. Was doing great. I think he had like 19 or 20 points, going into halftime, and then he ended up fighting Austin Rivers, coming off the bench and fighting him. So the flat minimum price tag, that really screwed me there. Could have got at least another 10 to 15, maybe even 20 from him. He was doing very, very solid. LaMelo Ball was great. Naismith, I absolutely chased that. I felt like an absolute fish. He had like 2 fantasy points after the first quarter and then really turned it on. And then Pascal is just the most frustrating thing in the world. I mentioned this hundreds of times. I will never run good where I get a low-owned stud in one of the best matchups, if not the best matchup in the board, where they actually do something. Pascal had 1 fantasy point in the first quarter. How does that happen? Against the Rockets, the worst team in the league. And he only gets 39. It's just frustrating stuff like that. But once again, can't complain too much because I did finally almost run neutral. Close. But yeah, solid night there. Let's look to continue the success in tonight. As I mentioned in my free Patreon write-up, that's where I talk through all my favorite core building blocks. I go through game by game, all that stuff you can check out. Link down below. It's free, 100% free. So going into tonight's slate, let's start off with the Clippers and the Knicks. This is going to be a quicker breakdown than usual just because there's a ton of injury news we had to wait on for this slate. That's very, very impactful here for multiple games. So it's really hard to kind of know who's in, who's out. I'll talk through the pivot plays, kind of my route, my thought process on it. But as of right now, it's really hard to kind of know because there is some huge pivot plays and shifts depending on the injury news. So make sure to keep that in mind. If you're someone who doesn't like waiting for the injury news, which, it's hard to play DFS if you're not someone who's constantly updating the injury news and waiting for it and making pivot plays. It's going to be hard to cash long term. But it's one of those things I'd suggest taking this Saturday slate off if you don't want to constantly be looking at Twitter to see who's in and who's out, because it's going to be one of those slates. And there's a huge pivot play here in Denver if Jokic gets randomly ruled out and Gordon gets ruled in, or both of them are out. So a ton of craziness could happen with this slate. So just make sure to stay updated on Twitter. I don't think I'll be super active by lock. I might take tonight's slate off just because I think I might be doing stuff. So I don't know if I can be 100% active looking at the injury news, but maybe I'll just throw a lineup in a single dollar. We'll see. But yeah, keep that in mind. It's going to be a crazy slate. So it wouldn't be a bad one for you guys to take off. But moving on to the first game here, Clippers and New York Knicks. For this game, luckily, there's really not really much injury news. The only news is Brunson, and we'll get that, about 30 minutes before the game starts. So nothing too crazy here, but the Clippers, it's really just going to be Kawhi and Paul George. Decent contrarian spin-up options. Kawhi's been the better of the two. That's why he's priced up a little bit more here. I mean, he's been shooting the ball a ton, 20 plus the 40 minutes the past few games. So I like the upside there. Kawhi is a solid contrarian spend up option. Paul George, a little bit riskier at times, as you can see. I mean, the same amount of minutes, hasn't been shooting as much as him, but he's a little bit better at the assists, the rebounds. He's good at getting steals as well. So they both have solid upside. Don't mind them there. They're like fringe first tier plays for me. Secondary options, Powell, Zubac. They're good GPP plays. Powell is decently priced. I don't love it, but he has upside. He's just very scoring dependent off the bench. Zubac, he's there. The minutes, you can't really trust it. He has double-double upside. If he can get those minutes, he's productive when he's out there in 30 minutes. But yeah, I mean, those two are really it besides the main two for me, and that's it for the Clippers. Moving on to the Knicks. The next side, obviously, the big news is Brunson. If he's in, I prefer getting to Randall and Barrett. Barrett, because of his price tag, even though he's super, super risky, his minutes are all over the place. The most secure minutes on this team are going to be a guy like Randall, who should play close to 40 minutes. He's been the most consistent. He's been the best. Brunson, right behind Randall in terms of the minutes. He should see around 40 as well. He's been super aggressive. I don't mind him. Don't love the price tag, but you could definitely land him if you wanted to. I just prefer getting to Randall because he's, more consistent. The minutes are great on him. He's got the double-double upside with the points and rebounds. And then Barrett, just because he's the cheapest. Now, his minutes are all over the place. He played 41 in that last game. Before that, he got benched, played 27, 31 before that. So he is risky, but I do like his price tag there. But if Brunson's out, obviously we're going to want to load on quickly there at 5,700. He'd be a great play, even though he's coming off that bad game last game, starting for Brunson. Grimes a solid value play there at 4,800. He should see about 35 minutes. I don't mind getting to Hardenstein. I don't trust the minutes. 40 that first game, he was doing super well. 29 in the last game. I think we expect around 20-ish from him. He looks like okay value play. Same thing as Sims, okay value play. Moving on to Phoenix in Detroit. This is a spot where I do think we could see maybe Chris Paul being ruled out because it is a back-to-back. Maybe there's trade rumors going on. We'll have to wait and see. But as of right now, let's just assume he's in. If he's in, 8,500. It's a great matchup here versus Detroit. I just don't love the price tag. He's just contrarian play there for me. I do like Aiden a good amount at 7,600. Bridges, just another secondary option. I think my favorite would be Cam Johnson there. He missed the last game because of injury management. Should be back. Great spot here. He's super score independent, but 5,400, I think he has enough upside to be a fantastic play tonight. Craig, Saric, they're decent value options. Saric should come off the bench. He's 15 to 20. He had the best game last game out of pretty much the whole team. 37 fantasy points. But yeah, I don't think you need to chase that. Obviously, if Chris Paul's ruled out, they're going to either start Saban Lee or Damian Lee. They'd both be great value plays there. That's really it. Moving on to Detroit. Detroit, if you're chasing upside, it's hard just because the minutes for all these guys are all over the place. They're playing a ton of guys. So right now, obviously the two main guards, like Ivy and Bogdan, do have the highest upside. Bogdan's minutes are the safest out of everyone. He should be playing around 35-ish minutes. The rest of the team, minutes are all over the place. It's really hard to trust. Ivy did great, but he only played 29 minutes. And that's the issue. The minutes are just not there for him right now. They're all over the board. Same thing with Sadiq Bey. Minutes are all over the place. He's had some solid upside. So I don't mind landing these guys. They're just more secondary options for me. I think if I had to pick my three favorites, it'd probably be Burks if he starts again. Duran, if he starts, which he should, 5,400. And then Stewart, if he starts, plays alongside Duran. I don't expect, obviously, 6 assists, 16 boards, but he has solid upside there. He's pretty cheap, 4,600. And I will mention Diallo, as I always do. He's super productive when he's out there, should see around 20-ish minutes. Obviously, he has the opportunity to play more if someone gets in foul trouble or injured. Moving on to Portland and Chicago. No news here. I like Dame as a spin-up play, a bounce-back spot here against the Bulls. Grant and Simons have some interest for me, but I still just prefer getting to Dame if I'm getting one of the top pieces. Josh Hart makes for a decent value play. Don't trust him to shoot 13 times. He's a guy who I think that's the most he's shot on this season. He's tied it multiple times where he's had 13 attempts, but don't chase that. But he is a solid upside even if he doesn't shoot, as you can see, versus Atlanta. 33.5 points because he's a guy who does a little bit of everything. So good amount of interest in him once again. And then Eubanks and Watford will split the center minutes. Watford is the guy who had the huge game there. 9 and 12 was very, very, very solid. So I do think people are going to chase him. He's probably going to be 40% owned. I think there's a reason you can definitely pivot off of that, but at the same time, 3,000 should see around 20, mid-20s minutes from him going against the Bulls. I don't mind it. And obviously, Eubanks is solid there as well. Moving on to Chicago. I like Vooch. I like DeRozan here. We just saw what Porzingis was able to do against Portland with no Nurkic. Kind of expect the same thing for Vooch here. He should be good to go. Zach's just kind of there for me. Pat Williams. The big news is Pat Williams. If he's out, I think we can get a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. to start at 3,000. I don't mind him. He's not like the most productive, but he can go up there, get you 15 to 20 fancy points. If he's shooting very well, gets you blocks or steals. Maybe he gets you 25. So at flat minimum price, he's definitely worth a look as a value play. And then if Caruso's out, more minutes for a guy like White, Dragic, and Ayo. I think out of those three, my favorite would be Dragic, even though he's the most risky just because he'll be coming off the bench, but he'll be super aggressive. We saw games earlier this season where he'd play like mid-20s and he could easily get you there. So 3,200, definitely keep an eye out on him. Moving on to Houston and OKC. Now this is where some of the injury news comes out to play. Jalen Green's questionable. Tate's questionable. Eric Gordon is out. So it's one of those where it'll be interesting to see what the starting lineup is like. Obviously, if Green's back, really just prefer getting to Green and Sengun. Maybe you could take a dart throw on whatever starting point guard they throw in, but it'd really just be those two for me. They'd soak up all the usage. Now, if Green's out, Sengun still looks very solid at that price tag with the usage. I'd assume they'd start Martin, Jabari Smith, Sengun, Knicks, and then I don't know who the shooting guard would be. Maybe they'd go with Josh Christopher. Maybe they throw like a Garrison Matthews in. Maybe they go bigger with Tari Eason. So there's just a lot of news, and it's very hard to figure out what the rotation is going to be like. So kind of have to pin that and come back to that when it's closer to lock. Moving on to OKC. I love SGA here as a bounce back spot. We saw him do okay against them last game. Only 24 points when he's averaging 31 on the season. So I like him as a bounce back, contrarian spin up play. Giddey, he looks solid in the mid-range. Jalen Williams looks okay. That's really it. Moving on to Miami, another team where there's huge injury news. I love the price tags on Bam, Jimmy, and Tyler. Even though it's a tough matchup here, they should be playing a ton of minutes. I expect close to 40 for all three of them in this matchup here. So yeah, they all look very, very solid. Victor is doubtful. Kyle Lowry's out, so that means Gabe Vincent should most likely start. If he does, I think he makes for a very solid value play. He should be in line for huge minutes. Strus should see a good amount of minutes, as well. So I like the value for the Miami. I like the main guys for Miami, which is sometimes you don't like that because obviously Miami is Miami. They haven't been the best, and they're getting a tough matchup here against Milwaukee. But yeah, those guys look great. Maybe we could see a little bit more minutes for a guy like Highsmith off the bench, but I don't think we're going to do that. But good amount of interest for Miami. Let's just assume Vincent for right now is good to go. I think he makes for another core play. Moving on to Milwaukee. No real standouts for me. Giannis is coming off the 54 fantasy point game. A tough matchup here, so at that price tag, he's just there. Same thing with Holiday. Brook Lopez, you can definitely go to him if you want some upside there in GPPs. And that's really it. Middleton's still on the 20 minutes limit, so there's no need to get to him. So moving on to the last two games here. Dallas, big news is Luka's out. Wood's still out. Dinwiddie's questionable. Now, if he's in, he becomes a must play. If he's out, then I do think they're going to start Frank and most likely Jaden Hardy. Hardy would be probably the best play on the slates, without a doubt. He'd be in line to play probably 30-plus minutes. He'll be super aggressive when he's out there. So I don't know why this dude doesn't get more minutes. I've been saying it since the start of the season. Play this guy minutes. He's an absolute dog. So we'll have to wait for that Dinwiddie news, but that's the huge news there for Dallas. Obviously, if Dinwiddie's in, my favorites would be Dinwiddie and Hardaway Jr. The rest of the team would be secondary options. But obviously, if Dinwiddie's out, then we can look to, you could play a Frank. I don't love it. I prefer getting to Hardy. And then Hardaway Jr. would still look solid. Secondary options would be a little bit better. Moving on to the Warriors. Now, these guys are, Steph's probable, Clay's questionable, Draymond's questionable. This could be another spot where Steve Kerr absolutely screws us. As we saw last game, he ruled out Draymond minutes. You're supposed to give him 30 minutes. Did not. He gave us 3 minutes before the slate started that he was ruled out. So it could be one of those where he does it again. So once again, another frustrating slate where if you don't want to keep up with injury news, I suggest don't play in it because could really screw everyone here. If let's say Steph gets randomly ruled out after being probable, Clay's ruled out, Green's ruled out, then you have to go back to Poole, we'll have to go back to DiVincenzo, Kuminga. So it's one of those where it's like if all these guys are in, really for me, it'd just be Steph and Clay. Maybe you can look to a Looney as a random, value play there at 4,500. I don't think you need to do it. But yeah, there's a lot of news there for that Golden State side that we do it to wait on. And then moving on to Atlanta and Denver. Atlanta side, Young, Murray looks solid. Capella's there. Minutes have been great recently. Hunter, I think he's my favorite play, just because he should see the minutes. You can't expect him to shoot 10 to 15. Like, I had a great game from him last night. But usually you can kind of expect 25 to 35-ish 25 to 35-ish fantasy points from him. And then Okongwu, you could take a shot on him. Don't mind that. But yeah, not a lot of interest in Atlanta. And then Denver, the big news is Jokic. Obviously, huge news, because if he's out, you're going to want to load up for Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon. And then there'll be huge value. Like, maybe they start Zeke, maybe they start Jeff Green, maybe DeAndre Jordan. So just huge news there with the Jokic and Gordon news, because if one of them's in, then obviously whoever's in, whether that's Jokic and Murray, they look great. If it's Murray and Gordon, they look great. And then the value plays Victor Vlatko, played 32 minutes. He kind of had like a ceiling game there in that start, but he'd be a solid value play. So there's just a ton of things that could go on and happen in this spot here for Denver. But yeah, one of those slates where there's a ton of injury news. If you don't like, as I mentioned 1,000th time, if you don't want to keep up with injury news, it's not a slate for you guys to play. It's going to be super frustrating waiting for all this injury news. If you want to be sharp, you play around the fact that Jokic and or Murray could both be ruled out, or one of them being ruled out, one of them being ruled in, and you're going to have to build your lineup around that, which is frustrating because Jokic is 11-4. Gordon's not that cheap either. Same thing with Murray. So just a lot to deal with this slate. So hopefully we start getting into more news before we get into the afternoon. But yeah, that's the breakdown. If you guys like the breakdown, hit that like button. I do greatly appreciate it. I should have a Price Picks video out later today as well for this slate. So yeah, hit that like button. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.